Have you ever wondered whether a small decision made in just a few seconds could change the rest of someone's life? Do you believe that a quiet act of kindness done without recognition could lead to something no one ever expected? That the person you stop to help today could be the one who helps you find yourself? This is the story of Andre, an 18-year-old black boy orphan living in a small town where winters seemed to never end. Andre had no family, no savings account, and no place to call home other than the rented room he could only keep if he paid every cent on time. But one January afternoon in the biting cold at the edge of town, Andre made a choice that most would have passed by. He stopped. That was it. He stopped to ask an elderly woman trembling at an empty bus stop, "Ma'am, are you all right?" A simple question it seemed, but it opened a series of events that went far beyond anything Andre could have imagined. Up next, you'll witness a journey that isn't about going from poor to rich, but from invisible to seen, from the silence of pain to the voice of kindness, from a rusty old bike to a future no one could have predicted. And you'll understand that sometimes you don't need the whole world to change your life. You just need to stop and truly see someone. Stay until the end of the video, because this isn't just a beautiful story. It's a reminder that kindness never disappears. It's just finding its way back to you in a form you didn't expect. In a small town where winters seem to arrive early and linger longer than anywhere else, there was a boy named Andre. He was 18, thin, quiet, and all he had was a rusty bike once his mother's to hold on to. That bike wasn't just transportation. It was Andre's tool for earning every single dollar, delivering fast food, picking up medicine for elderly folks, and running errands between shops on Main Street. Without it, Andre couldn't work. Without work, Andre had no place to sleep. Everything in his life hung by a fragile thread, and one that the bitter winter could snap at any moment. Andre had no family. His mother had passed away from a heart condition 2 years earlier, right there on the kitchen floor of their rented apartment. There was no money for an ambulance, no insurance. After that, Andre bounced through a few temporary shelters, sometimes sleeping on the library couch at school when the security guard forgot to check. He still tried to study until it became impossible while working night shifts to survive. This kind of story isn't rare in America. In fact, over 4 million American teens experience homelessness or unstable housing each year. Many of them are still trying to finish school, still holding down jobs, and still wearing a smile when they hand you your delivery. But behind that smile are nights spent on park benches, dinners that are just a single sandwich, days spent trudging through snow just to afford one more night under a roof. Andre never complained. He didn't wait to be saved. He just pedaled. Through falling snow or howling wind on icy streets, or with frozen fingers wrapped around his handlebars, he kept pedaling. Every rotation of that bike wheel was Andre's way of telling the world, "I'm still here. I haven't given up." And then one late January afternoon, as Andre prepared for his final delivery of the day, just enough to pay rent for the upcoming week, he paused to take a sip from his old metal water bottle. At that moment, he had no idea that a turning point was only steps away. Because right there at the cracked old bus stop at the end of the street, an elderly woman stood alone, lost and shivering as if the world had left her behind. That afternoon, Andre had one last delivery, a small grocery bag to an apartment nearly 20 minutes away by bike. The order wasn't worth much, only $11. But to Andre, it was everything, the final piece he needed to pay rent before 8 p.m. Time was tightening like a rope around his chest. Not because someone was chasing him, but because the landlord who'd looked Andre in the eye earlier that week had said plainly, "No payment by 8 p.m. Friday, the lock gets changed." That's the rule. For most people, being a few hours late might be a mild inconvenience. But for Andre, being late meant losing his home. He'd counted every coin all week, skipped bottled water, skipped lunch. He even sold the pair of gloves his mother had knitted him just to make up the final $2. Everything was calculated down to the cent. This final delivery was the last piece of the puzzle, and so Andre set off. Bag strapped across his chest, he pedaled fast through frozen streets. The wind howled past his ears. His knees ached from the cold. But his eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, partly because he had a goal, partly because he had no other choice. Andre's story isn't an exception. In modern America, millions live in what's called housing insecurity. They don't know where they'll sleep that night. Many juggle odd jobs: delivery dog, walking janitorial work just to keep a small corner to rest. They're not lazy. They're racing against time just like Andre once was. And in that race, every passing minute carries the weight of survival. Andre knew that, which is why when he stopped by the old bus stop to drink some water, he didn't plan to stay long. But then he heard a sound, not loud, just a shaky voice like breath in the wind. Willow Lane, or Garden Street. Bus 12. I've been waiting a long time. Andre turned around. An elderly woman with silver hair wearing a threadbare wool coat stared into the distance, her cloudy eyes searching for some lost memory. He knew he needed to go. He knew every late minute brought him closer to eviction. But Andre's legs didn't turn away. They stepped toward her. Because sometimes the hardest challenge isn't hunger or cold. It's choosing to stop when every voice in your head tells you to keep going. And in that moment, the story changed. Andre saw her before he truly saw her. She stood silently beside the old bus stop, the kind no longer serviced by any regular route, if at all. Her long wool coat reached her ankles, worn so thin you could no longer tell its original color. She kept her head slightly bowed, mumbling Willow Lane. Number 12. I've been waiting so long. People around her didn't notice. They walked past her as if she were invisible. A woman pushed a shopping cart by, eyes glued to her phone. A man in a suit hurried by, stepping wide as if avoiding a dirty puddle. But not Andre. Something about her made him stop. Maybe it was her eyes, cloudy but not lifeless. Maybe it was her tiny hand clutching an old leather purse like she was holding onto a fading part of herself. Or maybe it was because Andre knew the feeling of being left behind, the feeling of standing in a crowd and not being seen by anyone. He walked over and gently asked, "Ma'am, are you okay?" She turned, squinting as if trying to focus. And then a faint smile appeared, fragile like sunlight in winter. "I think I'm lost. I've been waiting for the bus, but maybe I'm at the wrong stop, or the wrong day, or maybe I've just forgotten something." That answer wouldn't surprise anyone who's had an elderly loved one. In the US, for every 10 people over 65, at least 2 experience what's called confusion episodes, moments of disorientation caused by age memory loss or Alzheimer's. And many of them are alone. No one stops. No one remembers. That's what made Andre different. He didn't have much, in fact, he had almost nothing. But he had just enough to stop. He had just enough to listen. Andre tried to ask for her name, address, where she needed to go, but every answer was vague. Then he noticed a small necklace around her neck, a silver pendant engraved with a delicate but clear inscription, Evelyn Rose, 48 Oak Hill Drive, North Side. That was her home. And that was the moment Andre understood. She wasn't just lost, she had been forgotten. There's something strange that happens when you grow old without anyone by your side. The world moves too fast. You speak slower, but no one has time to listen. You need help, but people think you're being a bother. Slowly, you disappear from everyone's view, even though you're still standing there, still breathing, still waiting. Evelyn wasn't the only one who'd fallen into that gap, but that day she was lucky, because an 18-year-old boy who hadn't yet found his own place in the world saw her. And the amazing thing is, we don't need to have everything to offer kindness. Sometimes you just need to stop, just need to see, just need to remember someone the world has forgotten. Andre looked at his old bike, then back at Evelyn. 48. Oak Hill Drive wasn't close. 2 hours by bike, most of it uphill. If he went, he'd miss the delivery. And the room he called home wouldn't be waiting for him by morning. He knew that, but sometimes the right thing doesn't come from reason. It comes from instinct, from compassion, from a memory of a mother who once told him, "If you can't change the world, change someone's day." Andre smiled gently, leaned down and said to Evelyn, "I'm not sure I know the way, but if you don't mind riding on the back of my bike, we can find our way home together." Then Andre took off his old scarf, laid it over the back seat for comfort, and carefully helped Evelyn climb on. One hand on the handlebar, one hand holding on to hope, and the journey began. Andre knew exactly what he was sacrificing. As he bent down to tighten his backpack straps and helped Evelyn settle onto the back rack of his rusty bike, his watch showed nearly 6:20 p.m. From there to Oak Hill Drive was nearly 2 hours of riding. That meant he wouldn't make it in time for the last delivery. That meant he wouldn't be able to pay rent. And that meant he might not have a place to sleep tonight. It was a clear decision, not an accident, and he still chose to do it. Why? Maybe because Andre understood that when someone is lost and vulnerable, what they need most isn't directions, but a person willing to walk with them. He knew that feeling. He had once been the child standing behind the hospital waiting for someone to come, only to realize no one would. He had once eaten stale bread and thought, if only someone remembered me even just once. Maybe compassion shouldn't be measured in dollars or deadlines. Maybe you can't always do the right thing and still keep everything you need. The truth is, sometimes you have to lose something. Sometimes helping others means giving up something of your own. In today's world, we're often taught, take care of yourself first. Hold on to what you have. Don't let anyone slow you down. But if everyone only looks after their own share, who will be the one to stop? Andre did. Not because he had spare time or because his kindness was backed by wealth. He stopped because that's what he wished someone had once done for his mother. Because the world needs people who just once choose compassion over safety. It wasn't a mistake. It was a commitment. And so Andre began to pedal. At first slowly. The streets were slick, the tires crunching over gravel and melting ice. Evelyn sat quietly on the back, lightly trembling her hand, clutching the edge of Andre's coat like a child afraid of getting lost. He wrapped his jacket around her shoulders, leaving himself with only a thin hoodie. Neither of them spoke at first. Only the wind, the creak of the bike chain, and the quiet roll of tires across the silent roads. It was a journey no one saw, but enough to change them both. Along the way, Evelyn began telling fragments of old stories about her late husband, about a grandson who once played hide and seek in the rose garden behind the house, about picnics she couldn't quite remember the location of. Some stories ended mid-sentence as she forgot the rest, but Andre listened like they were songs that had never been sung in full. Soon she stopped talking and began to hum a lullaby from long ago, and Andre slowed down just enough so the melody wouldn't be cut short by the rush of his heartbeat. As they passed a small bridge where the streetlights no longer worked, Andre thought about where he might sleep that night, maybe on a park bench or behind the grocery store if the owner still had a soft spot for him. But he didn't stop to calculate. He just kept pedaling one turn after another, because some things matter more than comfort. That was the first lesson of the journey. Be kind, not because you have plenty, but because you know kindness is worth holding on to. And then when the white-painted iron gate of 48 Oak Hill Drive appeared in the dark, Andre nearly collapsed from exhaustion. But the elderly man who opened the door, his eyes filled with tears when he saw Evelyn, made every hardship fade away. Andre didn't receive a reward. No money. No promise that things would get better. But he did receive something else, a hand on his shoulder, a quiet voice saying, "You brought her home." And that was when everything began to change. The town disappeared behind them as Andre and Evelyn left the bright lights of Main Street. Darkness fell quickly in winter, and on the winding uphill roads leading to the outskirts, only moonlight shimmered on the damp pavement, with cold winds slicing through the air. The old bike squeaked with every shift in weight as Andre climbed the hills. Evelyn sat behind him, her hand gripping lightly onto the coat he had wrapped around her, clinging to the one thing that still anchored her to the world. Sometimes she'd murmur things that made no sense. Disconnected sentences, faded place names, names that might have been real or just echoes in her memory. Jeremy used to ride on the back like this. He loved the wind in his face, but I was always afraid he'd catch a cold. One time, my husband and I got lost in the snow, and he just said, "Don't worry, as long as we're together, we'll be fine." Andre didn't respond. He just listened. And that was what Evelyn needed. There is a quiet kind of healing that happens when someone listens to you, not to correct, not to fix, but just so you can exist fully within your own story. And that night, Andre was the only one who did that for Evelyn. We often think connection only happens between those who are alike. But sometimes the most miraculous bond forms between two complete strangers meeting at the exact moment they most need to be seen. A strong gust of wind blew through, forcing Andre to lean into it to stay balanced. His hands began to go numb. His knees throbbed with pain at every upward push. But he didn't stop. Because the only thing keeping him warm now wasn't a coat, it was purpose. Nearly an hour passed before they reached a small gas station at the town's edge. Andre stopped. He pulled out the last dollar bill he had and bought a cup of hot tea. Not for himself, but for Evelyn. When he placed the warm cup in her hands, she gently pushed it back. You drink it first. I'm old, I'm used to the cold. You need it more. And in that moment, in the middle of a freezing night beside a lonely gas station, Andre no longer felt like an invisible poor boy. He felt seen, cared for, and that was enough to keep going. Their story had no soundtrack, no spotlight, only the quiet spin of bike wheels and the soft breath of two people, one old, one young, riding through the night together. Sometimes the longest journey is where you learn the simplest truth. Kindness isn't a gift you give, it's a bridge you build between two hearts. When they reached the gate of 48 Oak Hill Drive, it was nearly 9:30 p.m. It was an old house painted white with ivy covering one wall. A soft yellow light glowed from a small window on the ground floor. Andre helped Evelyn off the bike, his legs shaking from cold and fatigue. He knocked twice, and an older man opened the door, shocked to see Evelyn standing there. His face instantly changed from worry to relief to gratitude. She left in the afternoon. We called the hospital, the police. No one knew where she was. Andre simply nodded. He didn't want to explain. He didn't need anyone to shower him with thanks. He just wanted to make sure Evelyn got home safely. The man invited him in, said he'd give him a ride back, cook him a meal. But Andre declined. I'm okay. Thank you, sir. Then he pulled a receipt from his pocket, the back was blank, and scribbled his phone number. If she ever needs anything, I can come back. And then he turned and rode back into the night, unaware that his room's door was now locked, unaware that his bag had been left behind like an unclaimed parcel, unaware that what he had just given away would change the rest of his life. Andre returned to town close to midnight. The flickering street lamps cast a dull yellow over the misty pavement. He pedaled slower, not from fatigue, but because he wasn't sure there was anything left to return to. The bike turned into the alley behind the old boarding house where he'd stayed for nearly 2 months. The building was run down with peeling paint, a loose balcony railing, and a porch light that never worked. Andre parked his bike, stepped onto the porch, and saw it. A small plastic bag. Inside, hastily folded clothes, an old towel, a cracked phone charger, and taped to the door a scribbled note in thick black marker. Past due. Locks changed. Andre stood there. Didn't knock. Didn't call. Just looked. He had known it was coming, but knowing didn't make it hurt any less. His legs still trembled from the long ride. His hands were so cold they'd gone numb. But what numbed him more wasn't the cold. It was the simple truth. Sometimes you do the right thing and still lose. There was no reward waiting for Andre after that journey of kindness. No warm bed. No one standing by to pat his back and say, "You were brave." No magical rent money falling from the sky. Just a locked door and darkness. We love stories of kindness with happy endings. The good person helps and then they're rewarded. But real life doesn't always work that way. In America, tens of thousands of homeless youth continue to go to school, go to work, and try to live kindly every single year. Not because they're lazy, but because they have no safety net, no family, no sponsor, no empty room waiting for them to come back to. Andre was one of them. He didn't get angry, didn't complain. He simply turned his bike around and rode off into the night destination unknown, not to find a place to sleep, but to escape the feeling of standing still, because standing still meant accepting abandonment. About 30 minutes later, Andre rode past the alley behind Johnson's Market, a small shop where he'd once helped unload boxes in exchange for a loaf of bread and a few coins. A light shone from the ground floor window. He knocked softly on the side door, once, then twice. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. Mr. Johnson, short and round, wearing a thick robe, a mug of hot coffee in hand, looked at him from head to toe. No surprise, no questions. Just a sigh, then he stepped aside. Storage room in the back has a fold-out bed. Don't touch the wine crates, and don't freeze to death in here. Andre nodded softly, as if afraid to break the fragile space of kindness that had just opened. He stepped inside a storage room filled with the smell of citrus and cardboard, with an old radiator groaning in protest at the winter chill. He had no thick blanket, no locked door, but he had a corner to rest. And for the first time in weeks, he closed his eyes without fear. Kindness doesn't always bring good things right away, but it always opens a door, not in the world, but in someone's heart. The next morning, Andre woke before sunrise. He tidied up the storage room, restacked the fruit crates out of habit. When Mr. Johnson entered, he said nothing, just slid a banana and a paper cup of coffee toward Andre. No compliments, but none were needed, because sometimes true gratitude isn't in words, but in small actions done quietly, and then when no one expected it. A black car quietly pulled up at the curb. A man in a long coat stepped into the store and asked for Andre. That morning, the town awoke in the soft gray light of winter. Steam rose from car hoods. Kids huddled in oversized jackets, backpacks heavy on their shoulders. Andre stood behind the counter at Johnson's Market, hands cupped around a steaming paper coffee cup, eyes watching the street as if searching for something unnamed. He wasn't waiting for anything. He was simply existing in the most literal sense. After everything he'd gotten used to, no one coming back. And then that car appeared, a sleek black sedan far too polished to belong in that part of town. It pulled over slowly like it was waiting for an invisible cue. The man stepped out tall, neat in a charcoal coat, his demeanor calm. He looked around, then walked into the store. His eyes scanned the space, then landed on Andre. "Excuse me, are you Andre?" Andre nodded, cautious. The man smiled softly. "My name is Charles. I work for Mrs. Evelyn Rose. She remembers everything, and she very much wants to see you again." No further explanation was needed. In that moment, Andre understood that crumpled receipt with his messy handwriting hadn't been tossed away. It had been kept, read, remembered. He stayed quiet for a moment, not because he didn't believe it, but because for most of his life, Andre had learned to live without expecting anyone to look back. And now when someone finally did, he didn't know how to react. Charles didn't push. He simply added gently, "She said, you didn't just bring her home. You brought her back to herself. Strange, isn't it? That sometimes the person who's lost becomes the mirror that reflects what's still bright in us." Evelyn, the fragile, confused woman from the night before, was now the one seeking Andre. Not out of pity, but out of gratitude. There are times when the kindness you gave seems to vanish, but somewhere in silence, it's growing roots. An act no one witnessed can become a moment someone never forgets. Andre looked toward Mr. Johnson as if asking for confirmation. The man just shrugged and tossed him a small paper bag with a sandwich inside. "Go. There's always a place here if you need to come back." A simple sentence, nothing fancy. But to Andre, it was the first safety net he'd ever had. He smiled, nodded to Charles, and stepped outside. The car pulled away from the curb. The road he had pedaled through last night stretched ahead in daylight, same hills, same curves, but somehow lighter. Because this time, Andre wasn't alone. And because this time, he knew someone on the other end was waiting. Sometimes what you need isn't someone to save you, but someone who sees you clearly and believes you deserve another chance. As the car turned onto the stone-paved drive leading to Evelyn's estate, Andre felt something unexpected. Not fear, not loneliness, not the sense of being an outsider. The car rolled gently through the white-painted gates and stopped at the steps of an old mansion. The front garden was neatly trimmed despite the season's frost. Andre stepped out of the car, clutching the strap of his backpack. His heart beat fast, not from cold, but because he'd never entered a place like this as an invited guest. Charles led him through a carpeted hallway into a bright, warm room with dark wooden bookshelves and a large window overlooking the garden. There by the window sat Evelyn in a velvet armchair, no longer dazed, no longer lost. She turned, and when she saw Andre, her smile spread like sunlight at dawn. "My dear boy, you truly brought me home." Andre lowered his head, slightly shy. "I just did what anyone should do." Evelyn gently shook her head. "No, Andre, everyone should, but not everyone does, especially when it costs them their shelter, their meal, and their safety." She invited Andre to sit across from her, and in a short but emotional conversation, she shared something unexpected. After returning home, she hadn't been able to sleep. She had spent hours by the window wrapped in her shawl, holding that little piece of paper with his phone number in her hand. "You didn't leave me behind, and that awakened something in me I thought I'd lost long ago." There are small moments, no stage, no audience, that still become milestones in someone's life, because kindness doesn't need applause. It only needs to be seen. Evelyn paused, then opened a drawer beside her and handed Andre a handwritten note. The handwriting was shaky but neat. This isn't a contract, not some grand promise. It's just an invitation. If you ever need a place to stay, a space to rest, to find yourself again, this home always has a room. No conditions. No expectations. Just if you're willing. Andre read it slowly. There was one more line added beneath. And if you still want to go back to school, we'll figure it out. Together. He froze. Not because he was shocked, but because for the first time in his life, someone wasn't asking, how will you pay it back? They were asking, what do you need? There's a kind of wealth that doesn't come from money. It comes from empathy. Evelyn wasn't trying to rescue Andre. She was simply offering him something every person deserves: a new beginning. Andre looked up. His eyes were different now, no longer the eyes of someone ready to leave, but the eyes of someone wondering, for the first time, if he could stay. I, I didn't do it expecting anything. I just thought you needed help. Evelyn nodded, her eyes damp but shining. That's exactly why I want you to stay. Andre didn't respond immediately. He asked for some time, not because he didn't trust her, but because people who've lived on fragile hope often need time to believe in lasting goodness. That afternoon, Charles drove Andre back to Johnson's Market. There was no dramatic farewell, just Mr. Johnson wiping down the counter and muttering as if nothing had happened. You're back, huh? Good. There's a sandwich in the fridge. Andre smiled, warmed by the knowledge that whether he stayed or left, there was still a place that would wait for him. Andre returned to 48 Oak Hill Drive on a soft, sunny afternoon. Not as someone invited to stay, but as someone who chose to stay because he finally felt he belonged. Evelyn didn't ask again. She simply prepared a modest, bright room with a window overlooking the garden. No luxury, no decoration. Just a tidy bed, a wooden desk for reading, and a framed quote on the wall. You're safe here. In the days that followed, Andre didn't sleep in every morning like some might imagine. Instead, he woke early, helped Evelyn tend the garden. He learned how to make morning tea, read books in the living room, and spoke not to be judged but to be heard. And then one morning, as they sat under the back porch roof, sunlight pouring through the leaves onto the tea table, Evelyn said something Andre would never forget. You helped me find myself again. Now I want to help others do the same. And that was when the idea for the Willow Light Fund was born. A small fund, humble, but built from real-life experience, from gratitude, and from a desire that no one should have to walk through the night alone the way Andre once did. The name Willow Light was inspired by Willow Lane, the street Evelyn had mumbled when she was lost. No one knew if it was a real place or just a fading memory. But to them, it became a symbol. A road, however blurry, can still lead home, if there's light. They started small. Some money from Evelyn's personal savings. A spare room in the house converted into an office. Andre handled planning outreach to community organizations, revisiting teens he once passed on the street. The fund had 3 goals. 1. Support homeless youth in returning to school or finding stable work. 2. Provide safe temporary housing, no strings attached. 3. Host conversations between the elderly and the young, so people like Evelyn aren't forgotten and people like Andre aren't left alone. It wasn't a charity project meant to save anyone. It was an act of listening, understanding, and believing. One day, Andre and Evelyn visited the first community center they helped refurbish. Cracked walls were repainted, old wooden chairs replaced. A small bookshelf was set up where every book had a handwritten note from the donor, a gift from someone who was once helped. No one forced Andre to do this. He didn't do it to repay anything. He did it because now he understood helping should not stop with one person. It should become a current flowing from one soul to another, and then to a whole community. In America, where more than 4 million youth experience homelessness every year, where the elderly are often seen as burdens, initiatives like the Willow Light Fund aren't just lifelines. They're reminders that dignity is not a privilege, but a basic right. And everyone deserves to be called by name, to be heard, to be remembered. Willow Light isn't a miracle. It's the result of one long night and a heart that chose to ask, are you okay? And ever since then, every time Andre passes the old bus stop where he first met Evelyn, he stops for a moment, not out of nostalgia, but to remind himself kindness doesn't disappear. It finds its way back if you're willing to open your heart. Every Sunday morning, Andre still rides that same old bike past the weathered bus stop on the edge of town. The bike has a new chain. Now the back seat is reupholstered in leather, and the pedals no longer squeak on uphill climbs. But it's still the same bike, still the vehicle of a journey that changed two lives. Each time he passes by, he slows down just a little, not to look for anyone, but to remember that everything started right there with a forgotten woman and a boy who chose to stop. So what if we stop too? Not our whole lives, just for a moment, a glance, a question, a pause in our pace. What would happen if you asked the cashier how they're really doing today? You noticed the elderly man struggling to cross the street. You listened when a friend talks about being tired instead of quickly telling them to hang in there. Maybe you won't change the whole world, but you will change someone's world. And sometimes that's enough. Kindness isn't an expensive gift. It's time. It's attention. It's the belief that someone is worth your pause. Evelyn once said to Andre, people don't need to have much to make a difference. They just need enough heart to do what's right, even when no one's watching. And Andre lived that way, not as a hero, but as someone who understood no one should be left behind. No one should have to find their way home alone. Today, hundreds of teens have received support from the Willow Light Fund. Dozens of elderly individuals once living in isolation now have companions in weekly conversations. And it all began with one winter night, with one moment of stopping. The lesson here isn't be kind so you'll be rewarded. It's this kindness doesn't go away. It just finds a way to return when you least expect it. So, next time you see someone who seems lost, alone, or simply invisible to the world, can you stop just for a minute? One question, one real look, because who knows, that may be the moment that changes someone's life. Andre stopped. And now he doesn't just have a roof over his head, he has a purpose, a community, and a future. Because sometimes you don't have to find home. Home finds you if you're brave enough to stop at the right moment. Thank you for watching this story to the very end. If you believe the world needs more quiet acts of kindness, please share this story. Leave a comment, I will stop. Because sometimes the smallest things change the most. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to never miss a story that touches the heart on the channel. That person was me.